Reading the Bible is like visiting another country. Not Canada, but someplace, really different. I love Ethiopia because it's so unique with names and foods and languages you can't find anywhere else. Even time works differently there. Their calendar is 8 years behind ours, and they've got 13 months in a year. Traveling somewhere so exotic, it can be exhilarating if you're curious, if you're open to new experiences, but it can also be unsettling. A real culture shock that can make us feel anxious and disoriented. We might want to head for the nearest McDonald's or Starbucks just to experience something familiar, something easier. Reading the Bible can feel like that. When we open these pages, we're stepping into a different time and place and culture. It's normal to feel a little lost. Whether you're traveling the world or the pages of Scripture, having a guide makes a big difference. A good guide doesn't tell you everything, but offers just enough help to ease your mind and encourage curiosity. I hope this guided tour through Genesis answers some of your biggest questions and also stirs up even better and deeper ones. And along the way, we'll also pick up some useful skills for understanding any book of the Bible. Let's begin by talking about what kind of literature Genesis even is. Because we read a textbook differently than a text message. We expect different things from different kinds of writing. Genesis can be divided into two parts, and each one is a very different kind of literature doing very different things. In this first video, we're going to explore Genesis chapters 1 through 11 together. And these chapters are written as a creation narrative. Creation narratives were a common genre in the ancient Near East. Typically, these were stories about how gods were created and how those gods then created other things through conflict with each other. These creation narratives also told the origin story of a single people group, usually emphasizing how that group was better than their less intelligent and immoral neighbors. But Genesis chapters 1 through 11 does something unexpected with this genre. It tells the story of one uncreated God creating everything else by simply speaking. And all people have the same origin, the same worth. They're created by the same God and are part of one family. Now, like other ancient Near Eastern creation stories, Genesis 1 to 11 is packed with figurative language, poetry, and symbolism. It's not aiming to be a science textbook or a straightforward historical account, and this can be disorienting for us. We're used to literature being either concrete and factual or figurative and fictional, but this ancient genre is both figurative and very true. In fact, you could say it communicates truths that go deeper than concrete language can even express. When we're reading the Bible, it's important to know what kind of literature we're dealing with. And if it's a story, like the creation narrative in Genesis 1 to 11, it's crucial then to understand the basic plot. So let's summarize the plot of Genesis 1 to 11 and then see how that plot can help us answer some common questions people have. Here's the story. Genesis begins with God turning uninhabitable disorder into an organized, beautiful, and good world that's teeming with life. God creates humans in his image, and that just means they're God's representatives, managing God's good world on God's behalf. They're made to cultivate and care for what God has made so that life will multiply and spread. Now, if they do this, they'll have good relationships with God and each other. They'll enjoy God's peace and plenty together. But humans have a choice in all of this. Will they trust God's definition of good, or will they define good for themselves? Will they manage the world God's good way, or go their own way? Humans choose to define good for themselves and go their own way. And this fractures relationships and spreads conflict and scarcity like a virus, infecting the first man and woman, then their family, then an entire city, and eventually a whole society called Babylon. Now, when questions arise about Genesis 1 through 11, this plot can guide us toward answers. and better questions. So for example, we've got questions about the talking snake that shows up in Genesis 3. Why is a snake talking? And why would God create an evil creature and put it in a good world to mess with humans? Where does the snake appear in the plot? The snake appears just as the first humans are deciding whether to follow God's good way or to go their own. And that's helpful to keep in mind. The snake is described as the most crafty creature of the field. Now that word crafty is arum in Hebrew. And throughout the Old Testament, arum is never negative, but it describes someone who's wise, careful, deliberative, prudent, someone who doesn't make rash decisions. So the snake isn't created evil. It's created with the capacity to make thoughtful choices. The snake could have followed God's way and encouraged humans to do the same. But instead, it chose to rebel against God and lead humans to join that rebellion. And after this rebellion, the snake is called the most cursed creature of the field. It goes from being the most arum, or wise, to the most arur, cursed, crawling on its belly and becoming less than it was designed to be. Now, the main idea here is that when creatures choose their own way and rebel against their creator, they become less than they were designed to be. This idea is central to the plot of Genesis 1 through 11. It's going to come up again and again throughout the book of Genesis. Now let's look at another question that the plot can help us answer. This one comes from Genesis 4. Is polygamy a good thing in the Bible? It's a great question. There's a principle in Bible study called the law of first mention. It says that our understanding of an idea, word, or symbol should be shaped by the first time it is mentioned in the Bible. For example, the first mention of polygamy occurs in Genesis chapter 4. What does that first mention tell us about polygamy? Now we need to remember the plot. The first mention of polygamy shows up when the sin and destruction that spread from one couple to their children has now spread to an entire city. And in that city is where we meet the first polygamist, a man named Lamech. Lamech is a descendant of the murderer Cain. And we're introduced to Lamech as he's singing a song to his wives about how much more violent he is than Cain ever was. So the first mention of polygamy is connected to the spread of sin and to a violent and arrogant man who is not following God's good way. Polygamy is in the Bible, but it's never endorsed or encouraged by God. God's good way has always been a faithful and lifelong commitment between one man and one woman. And when people deviate from that design, as we see in Lamech's story, sin and destruction spread. Remembering the plot can also steer us away from fun distractions and interesting rabbit trails and guide us back to the main point of a text, which brings us to what may be the most popular question asked about the book of Genesis. In Genesis 6, who are the Nephilim? Now, to refresh your memory, Genesis 6 says, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. And then it says that God didn't like this. And then the Bible says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So who are these sons of God, daughters of humans, and the Nephilim they produced? Now, some scholars believe the sons of God were spiritual beings who had children with human women. Others think they were descendants of Seth, Adam's righteous son, intermarrying with the descendants of Cain, who were not following God's way. Others point out that rulers in the ancient Near East often claimed to be gods or descendants of the gods, and they frequently took multiple wives, often by force. And these are all really interesting rabbit trails to go down, but the plot guides us back to what's most important. The main point here is that creatures are once again crossing boundaries set by their Creator. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful and took them, just as Eve saw that the fruit was desirable and took it. This recurring pattern of self-gratifying creatures taking what they want goes against God's way and spreads conflict in the world. Okay, one last question from Genesis chapters 1 to 11. What did Ham actually do to Noah in that tent? Again, it helps to remember where we are in the story. In Genesis 9, the floodwaters have receded. Noah and his family are on a mountain where he's planted a vineyard. Now in Genesis, mountains and trees, and sometimes vines and bushes, are intended to remind us of the Garden of Eden. These things mark places where humans often meet with God and decide whether to follow God's way or their own. So when we see that mountain and that vine in the story, we should lean in and be looking for someone to make an important choice. Noah takes the fruit of his vineyard, makes wine, gets drunk, passes out naked inside his tent. His son Ham enters the tent, sees his father lying there, and then tells his brothers about it, who quickly cover Noah's nakedness. Now, when Noah wakes up, he realizes what Ham has done to him and pronounces a curse on Ham's son, Canaan. So, what exactly did Ham do that was so terrible? And whatever our answer is, it needs to also explain how Noah knew what Ham did and why Canaan was cursed instead of Ham. So scholars have offered three primary solutions. One view is that Ham dishonored his father by seeing him naked or by failing to immediately cover his nakedness. But this theory doesn't explain how Noah knew what Ham had done to him as soon as he woke up, or why Canaan was cursed instead of Ham. A second possibility is that something more egregious happened in the tent. In the Bible, the phrases uncovered nakedness or look upon nakedness often refer to incestuous acts. You can see Leviticus 18 and 20 for examples of that. So this theory suggests that Ham may have done something like this to Noah. It explains how Noah knew what happened when he woke up, but it doesn't explain why Canaan was cursed rather than Ham. There's a third possibility, and it could explain all of this, but it's the most disturbing of the three. In Leviticus 18, uncovering the nakedness of a man's wife is also described as uncovering the nakedness of the man himself, since a husband and a wife are considered one flesh. So this view suggests that Ham uncovering his father's nakedness means that Ham had intercourse with Noah's wife, Ham's own mother. This was a way to assert dominance in the ancient Near East. For example, in 2 Samuel 16, Absalom overthrows his father, King David. And the first thing Absalom does as king is establish his dominance by sleeping with David's wives. Now, according to this third theory, Canaan is the child of Ham's sin with his mother, which explains why Canaan is cursed. In the Bible, a curse is not destiny. It's not a magic spell that takes away free will. A curse is being handed over to the consequences of sinful action. By abusing others to gain power and position for himself, Ham set a pattern of behavior that his descendants would be prone to follow. They don't have to follow it, but as we'll see throughout the Old Testament, many Canaanites choose to go Ham's way rather than God's good way. So in this first video, we've learned that paying attention to genre and plot can help us find our way when we get lost in the Bible. It's crucial to understand the kind of literature we're reading, and Genesis 1 to 11 is a poetic, figurative, and symbolic creation narrative focused on the origins of humanity and their relationship with God and with each other. We've also seen how important it is to follow the plot closely. In Genesis 1 through 11, that plot repeats again and again. Humanity faces the ongoing choice to follow God's way or their own, and their decisions have consequences. As we continue to read the Bible together, keep genre and plot in mind. Next time, we'll get into Genesis 12 through 50. We'll meet a new kind of literature. We'll take on some even more challenging questions. See you then.